StrayAllDay.com.
You're now tuned into the show where you learn the discipline to show up day after day to do the work, the confidence to put yourself out there boldly and authentically, and the mental toughness to continue showing up, doing the work, putting yourself out there, even when the success you've expected to achieve has yet to be achieved. And on top of all this, you get a huge dose of personal initiative. That is the go-getter energy that moves any one of us, including yourself, to go and make things happen instead of waiting for things to happen. And then we put all this together into a series of frameworks, approaches, insights, strategies, and techniques all underneath the umbrella of one unified philosophy that is called Work on Your Game. My name is Dre Baldwin, also known as Dre All Day, and welcome to the show. And today's topic is all the wrong ways to start a conversation. All right, now, before we get into this, I remind you all of two things. First of all, my daily motivation, Monday motivation message is guaranteed to have you focused, sharp, and on point to start your day or your week, respectively. All you got to do to receive these is be a member of my texting community, and guess what? It's free to join. So text me my number, 305-384-6894, and once we start sending that daily motivation, Monday motivation message out again, you'll be getting that message straight to your phone. Secondly, Work on Your Game University. This is the place where you get to work with me directly. This is the place where you get access to all of our best frameworks on mindset, such as Bulletproof Mindset, our best strategies, such as the Business Builder Framework, our best systems, such as we actually have a program called the Work on Your Game System, and accountability and implementation, such as our Next Mission Framework, 30 Days of Discipline, ASAP Confidence, 25 hours, Sell Yourself program, all of our best stuff about creating content, Content Machine, all of our masterclasses organized by category. You get access to all of that by going to workonyourgameuniversity.com. All that out the way, let's get into the topic here today, all the wrong ways to start a conversation. I discuss communication a lot here on this show because I notice that many people fail to achieve the outcomes that they want, or they fail to get their point across because they simply fail in communication and saying things the way that they need to be said. It's not that people necessarily have a bad idea or a wrong idea, or even that someone has a bad intentions. It's simply because people fumble in your communication skills. It's just the structure of your communication, not the intention of your communication, or even the substance of your communication. There's nothing wrong with it. It's your framework is off. And this framework matters. It matters a whole lot. So today we're going to focus on a specific area of how to start a conversation and how people consistently do this the wrong way, thus fumbling the ball of opportunity. Okay, you ready for this? Please listen closely and do not make these mistakes if I name anything that you are guilty of. Number one, and today we're talking about all the wrong ways to start a conversation. Emotional unloading. Do not start a conversation by emotionally unloading on your counterpart. Now, I'm going to start out this point by giving you an exception. If you're talking to someone who is positioned to receive your unloading, such as a parent, a best friend, a therapist, a coach, or a spouse, if you're talking to one of those people, then disregard this point. You can emotionally unload on them. If you're talking to anyone other than them, do not start a conversation by emotionally unloading and dumping all of your emotions on that other person. It will not go well. Any of you who has ever done this before or had it done to you, you know what I'm talking about. All right, so in every other situation, do not start the conversation with this for several reasons. For one, any person who does not occupy one of the roles that I mentioned above, parent, best friend, not just friend, best friend, therapist, coach, or spouse, all right, anyone who doesn't occupy one of those roles, they are not positioned, nor are they prepared to receive the onslaught of emotion you're about to throw at them, nor do they want to receive it. That's why you got to be very choosy in dumping your emotions on another person, because most people are not prepared to deal with your emotions, nor do they want to be prepared to deal with your emotions. As soon as you do it, they're going to try to figure out how to get the hell away from you. And again, all of you have probably had somebody do this to you, and you're like, I'm not in one of those roles, so why are you doing this? And you got the hell out of there. Did you not? Of course. Secondly, depending on which emotions you are unloading on the other person, they may become more reactive than receptive to what you are sharing. So for example, the emotion you're unloading on a person might be disappointment and anger and resentment, and the person you're unloading on might be a business partner of yours. They're not ready to deal with those emotions of yours, so they become reactive and they start defending themselves because of what you just threw at them, and they're defending themselves because you came at them. You come at somebody with offense, they're going to reply with defense. That's the way human nature works. So someone being defensive is not necessarily a negative thing. Why are they defending themselves? Are you attacking? All right. Otherwise, that's what people do when they get defensive, is because somebody's playing offense. So if you weren't offensive, they wouldn't be defensive. So do not try to criticize a person by saying, well, you're being defensive. Well, it depends. Are you playing offense? Yes, then yes, I'm gonna play defense. That's the way it works. If I was to get offensive with you, guess what you would do? Play defense. That's the way life works. So be careful of that common logical fallacy that people use. You're being defensive as if that means the person's doing something wrong. People can't defend if no one's going on the attack. So depending on the emotions you unload, again, this can mean someone becomes more reactive rather than receptive, and that's not the point of communicating. When you're communicating, you're usually not trying to get someone to react. Sometimes you might be. Many times you just want people to receive what you are saying, and people can't receive if they're reacting. You only do one or the other at the same time. Third reason why you don't do this, many people are simply not equipped to deal with heavy unloading of emotions from anyone, even from themselves. Many people just don't have the emotional maturity to deal with a heavy unloading of any type of emotion, whether from someone else or from themselves. Therefore, you shouldn't go dumping emotions on people who are ill equipped to deal with them, because nobody's going to win. You ain't going to get nothing. They're not getting anything, and time goes by. So this is a three-way loss for everybody, because you made the mistake of starting the conversation the wrong way with the wrong person. And I'm putting this on you. Does everybody understand what I'm saying here? So you should be careful in starting a conversation with this, because it will often leave you feeling empty inside because you just dumped out all your emotions and the other person did not respond the way that you hoped they would. You still feel unheard and unserved because you are sharing these emotions with someone who is not equipped to deal with them, nor are they equipped to help you. And to be honest, nor are they interested in helping you. And nobody wins. I will also add that if your emotions are negative in any way, such as anger, frustration, and they're directed at the person to whom you are speaking, or you already know this is a bad idea. Negative emotions dumped out on a person who is the subject of the negative emotions never works. This is an eternally failing strategy. You already know it's a bad idea. Why? And you're doing it anyway. You may not be able to control it in the moment, so I give you a little bit of grace, a little bit, not too much, which is why I'm pointing it out now, when hopefully you're not in the moment. You're listening to me right now, you're probably not in the moment. So when you unload negatively on the subject of your negative energy, they usually respond with the same energy that you gave them. Is this usually what happens? It's usually what happens. You know from experience that this isn't productive. It's not a good way to start a communication. So while you are calm and able to think logically, like right now, make sure you don't do this the next time you get emotionally triggered. Don't do this the next time you get emotionally triggered, because it's a failing strategy that, again, never works, never produces the outcome that you want, but it will waste time very easily. Waste time, waste energy, and nobody gets anything. Moving on to point number 2. Today's topic, once again, is the wrong ways to start a conversation. Number 2, accusations and assumptions. This is another one that is consistently violated by people, especially people who are in some way triggered when they're starting a conversation. Accusations and assumptions. Speaking of what I just said at the end of the first point, be careful that you do not start a conversation by accusing someone of something, even when you are 100% sure that they are guilty of what you are accusing. Yes, you heard me correctly. Let me say it again, just in case you thought I misspoke. Do not start a conversation by accusing someone of something, even if you are 100% certain that they are guilty of the accusation. Don't start the conversation that way. Why? Because the person doing the accusing, now you have become a prosecutor. That's what a prosecutor does, right? And you've been to court, you watch Law and Order. All right. So what does the prosecutor do? The prosecutor comes and they bring a charge. They accuse someone of a crime. And what does the other side do? The defense, what do? They defend themselves and say, no, I didn't. Why am I bringing this up? I'm bringing this up to remind you that when you show up to someone with an accusation as a prosecutor, they have no choice but to accept the opposing role as the defense. They go on the defensive because you started the conversation on the offensive. You see how that works? This is why you don't start a conversation on the offensive, because you immediately put the other person on the defensive. And this is good conversations don't come from this. Good conversations do not come from this frame. And it doesn't mean you can't get your point across, but you need to get it across in a different way with the right structure so that people can actually hear you rather than react to you, or listen to you rather than hear you. And because when someone listens, they will respond. When they only hear, they react. You understand the difference? When people hear you, they react. And if you attack someone, they hear it and they react immediately. When you come with a different approach, people will listen and then they can respond. A response is better than a reaction. You go to the doctor, they gave you some pills, and they say, "Uh-oh, this is bad news. Your body is reacting to the medicine. That means it's not doing well." But they say, "Hey, good news. Your body is responding to the medicine." That's a good thing. So response and react, not the same thing. Notice the difference. So again, when you show up accusing people, you become the prosecutor, and the other side of a prosecution is naturally the defense. So when you accuse someone, you assume the role of prosecutor, the other person naturally is the defense. And that means they're going to become defensive. They're going to defend themselves because you started the conversation by doing the wrong thing in accusing them. Don't do it. An assumption, folks, is another form of an accusation. Is done in the soft form. An assumption is a soft accusation. And you cannot hide your accusation by using assumptions. So if you do this, stop doing this. It's a pernicious way of accusing. It's a more passive aggressive way of throwing an accusation at someone is to throw an assumption at them, because the assumption is not even giving them a chance to respond. You're just putting the assumption within your statement, or it's couched within your question, and then you may be offering them a straw man to knock down that they didn't even set up because you made an assumption, ask them a question based on something that's technically not true. You understand? So be careful with assumptions and be careful with accusations unless you're trying to start an argument or you're trying to be combative with your opponent, such as in a political debate. I don't think most of you are having those kind of conversations every day. So let me tell you what to do instead of doing either one of these. Instead of accusing, instead of throwing assumptions out there, here's what you do. Ask a question. If you want to start a conversation with someone, ask a question that frames the very thing that you would have accused them of, even though you know they did it. Just ask them a question. So if you believe that your 10-year-old son took one of the cookies, freshly baked cookies off the counter, and ate it because you knew you made 3 cookies and now was only 2 cookies and he was the only one in the house aside from you, instead of throwing an accusation at him, "Hey, you ate that cookie," instead of saying, "Hey, I know you ate the cookie, so let's talk about it," instead say, "Hey, Johnny, there were 3 cookies here on the table. I see only 2 now. Do you know what happened to the other cookie?" Now, do you see how that starts a much different conversation? Even though, same information, we're trying to get to the same point, but do you see how starting the conversation a different way leads to a different energy? Is Johnny more likely to respond to you when you ask the question that way? Probably. He might still lie to you, but he's probably going to answer the question because you asked him a question. When you ask someone a question, guess what you do? You involve them in the conversation. When you're throwing an accusation at a person, you're not involving them in the conversation. You're throwing something in their lap and then not giving them a chance to respond to it. That doesn't work. At least not if you're trying to get along with the person. So when you ask a question, now when they answer, if they're being honest and you were correct, they will point out the issue themselves. Johnny will tell you, "Oh, I ate the cookie," rather than you saying, "Johnny, you ate the cookie." It's better if he says it, because now that he said it, he can't be mad at how the rest of the conversation goes. He just admitted that he ate the cookie. Now, you may think this doesn't make a difference, but people are much more open to hearing any form of critique or constructive feedback when they have themselves said the thing that you need to address. When they have owned it, and by saying it out of their own mouths, they own it, they're much more likely to be receptive to what comes next than if somebody else says it to them and basically tells you that you own it instead of you saying that you own it. Again, people tend to be much more active in situations when they feel like they have agency and they are involved in the process. And asking someone a question gets them involved in the process. And if instead you make a statement, you're not getting them involved. You're keeping you involved. And if your goal is to get along with this person and get cooperation from them, I suggest that you get them involved by asking a question rather than making statements. There are times in life when it makes more sense to make a statement than it does to ask a question. There are times when it makes more sense to ask a question than it does to make a statement. I'm saying here, if you're looking to start a conversation with a person, you're better off using the latter and asking a question rather than making an assertion. Everybody following me so far? This makes a huge amount of difference when you get the other person verbal and involved in the conversation. It's not a conversation until both people are talking, by the way. Moving on to point number 3. Today's topic, once again, is all the wrong ways to start a conversation. Number 3, putting a person on the defensive. This one you should already understand because we talked about it already in the first 2 points. You never want to start a conversation by putting the other person on the defensive. Now, let's be clear. You have no idea how another person is going to respond to things that you say or questions that you ask or just respond to you, period. You can't control whether another person goes on the defensive. You can't control it. However, you can strongly influence it, whether someone goes on the defensive or not. What do I mean by that? You can influence it by putting them in a position to where they may not feel as defensive as if you came at them in a different way. How you come at another person plays a big role in how they respond to you. It's not all in who they are, it's often in how you come at them. I don't consider myself an insecure or defensive person. However, if you come at me with an accusation and I know your accusation is some bullshit, I may defend myself against your accusation as a just simple response, is this human nature response. Like, what you just said is some bullshit. Wait, we're not going to move on from that point because what you said is wrong. And now I'm defending myself because you said something that wasn't true. Now, again, if you're trying to be in combat with someone, then you can start that way. I don't think most of your conversations, you're trying to be in combat with another person. So speaking of what I said in that second point, you never want to put anyone you're talking to on the defensive for many reasons. One, when a person gets defensive, there's no more construction happening in that conversation. So many times people give feedback, they want to call it constructive feedback or constructive criticism. Okay. When you put another person on the defensive, the conversation is no longer constructive. It's now destructive. Everyone knows the difference, right? Construction is like what I can see out of my building right now. There's a construction crew and construction workers, and they're building up a building. It doesn't exist, but it's going to exist when they keep building it. Destruction is when you tear the building down into rubble, you pull all the rubble away, and now you have flat land. Now you can finally do some construction on top of it. When you make a person defensive, the whole conversation becomes destructive. That person will either shut down, i.e., they're not going to really engage with you, or you become more accusatory, maybe both. But either way, the goal is not reached. Remember, in conversations, folks, there's a goal. There's an outcome you're looking to achieve. Remind yourself of the outcome before you start the conversation. Remind yourself of the outcome before you start the conversation. That usually changes how you start the conversation. When you remind yourself, okay, the goal here is for us to get along and this person to get my point and to be an even better worker, not for me to cuss them out and just get them a piece of my mind. That's what we usually do because we don't remind ourselves of the goal. What's the goal? So you don't want people shutting down because the goal won't be reached even if you had one. Secondly, when you put a person on the defensive, they become less apt to have further conversations of a similar nature with you because they'll remember how they felt in the previous conversation. When you make a person defensive with the way that you incorrectly open the conversation, they will be less open to having conversations with you in the future because they will remember what you did to them last time. That's why you got to be careful. And the way you start and handle conversations, even the way you end them. If a person feels attacked or defensive in a conversation, who's responsible for that? If another person feels attacked, doesn't matter if you weren't trying to attack them. If they feel attacked, then you can't achieve the goal. Whether you believe you are right or wrong has nothing to do with being accurate. Right or wrong is about whose opinion or whose approach was quote unquote better than the other person's approach. Accuracy is about what achieves the goal. And see, if we focus on accuracy rather than being right or wrong, then it doesn't matter who came up with the idea, who did what. All that matters is, did we achieve the goal, yes or no? Remember what kind of business we're in, ladies and gentlemen. A results-based business, not an opinion-based business. If a person feels attacked, they go on the defensive. That's how it works. And you know who's responsible for someone becoming defensive? The person who attacked them. So if you feel that you're being attacked, then the person who started the conversation that led you to feeling that way, they're responsible for it. Because understand this, people, not everybody's the same. You got to know how to communicate with one person versus how to communicate with someone else. Not everyone receives things in the same ways. The person who leads to another feeling attacked is responsible for that person feeling attacked. Because again, the goal can't be reached. So there is a more tactful way always to get your point across. And again, unless you're trying to make someone defensive, i.e. like you're on a debate team or something, or you're trying to make them look bad, getting someone defensive in conversation will never resolve the issue. So don't do it. You'll never resolve an issue by making someone defensive. So don't make people defensive. Third, whenever a person gets defensive in a conversation, the other person naturally falls into the role of the prosecution and they go on the attack. It's human nature. These are simple rules of human nature. And just because they are natural, i.e. human nature, does not mean you need to keep following them as habits. Just because something comes natural to you does not mean you should keep doing it. I'm telling you that these are the wrong ways to have a conversation. The fact that I'm pointing them out as human nature is framing to you how most people are not good at having conversations. The fact that I call it human nature doesn't mean you should just be okay with doing it. The fact that I'm calling it human nature is telling you why most people do this. And what you need to understand about these points that I'm sharing here is that this is the way that most people start conversations wrong. Most people start conversations the wrong way because of human nature, not because human nature has them doing things the right way. So you got to go against the grain of human nature, and you can condition yourself in a different way. You need to go against the grain, against your human nature, and do not fall into these traps. Many people fall in these traps all the time. I hear it all the time. I see it every single day. That's the reason why many people fail at communication. Not because you don't have a good point, not because you don't have positive intentions, but because you have a poor structure and a poor framework for how you are opening conversations. Let's recap today's class. All the wrong ways to start a conversation. Number one, emotional unloading. Our person is not your spouse, therapist, coach, or best friend. They are not prepared, nor do they want to be prepared to catch all the emotions you're about to dump on their front lawn. Number two, accusations and assumptions. Whenever you start a conversation with an accusation or an assumption, you become a prosecutor, which naturally makes the other person the defense. They're going to defend themselves. Whether you think they are justified in doing so or not, you should never put another person on the defensive, which means all you got to do to make sure that doesn't happen is do not make assumptions and do not accuse. When you don't do that and you instead use questions, open-ended questions, you put them in a position to get verbal with you. And now you have a conversation rather than a lecture. When prosecutors tend to lecture, they don't converse. Point number three, putting a person on the defensive. And again, you can't control whether someone else feels defensive, but you can influence whether they feel defensive based on the way that you communicate with them, with the words you use, the questions you ask, your energy, your aura, your body language, your posture. All of those things communicate to another person if you are accusing them or you're really asking a question or you're asking a question in the form of an accusation. People can read through that stuff. So you got to be careful with this stuff these days and never put another person on the defensive if your goal is to get cooperation from them. And if your goal is to make an enemy out of them, go ahead and put them on the defensive. But if you're trying to get cooperation, never, ever, ever put someone in position to where they feel defensive, because now you just lost the frame and there will be no construction in that conversation. There will only be destruction. Make sure you go to workonyourgameuniversity.com. We have a people skills program in there. It's all about communication skills, how to lead, how to have conversations. You want to learn how to have a sales conversation, how to overcome objections, how to make money through your conversations, not just through a landing page or a sales funnel. That's part of our training in the university. Go to workonyourgameuniversity.com. Work on your game. Dre, all